The Murder Shelf Book Club contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Listener discretion is advised.
Mr. Hillman, Mike said, every good detective has one or two big cases that eat at them. That's not to say they don't care about the others. It's just the one or two that weigh on, and frankly, haunt him the rest of his career and into retirement if it's not solved. My financial sleuth buddy couldn't be more right, and I begrudgingly knew it. In fact, like Russ Davis, the original detective, and a host of others who had spent countless hours trying to spot the creepy maggot who indeed take these two women's cases with them into retirement and onto their deathbeds. It's been 3 years, and we're no further than the day we started. From Chasing Down the Zombie Hunter by Troy A. Hillman. Well, welcome to the Murder Shelf Book Club podcast. I am your host, Jill. This is episode 148, Pathology Trumps Intellect, part 2 on Chasing Down the Zombie Hunter by Troy A. Hillman. I really hope you got this book for Christmas. I heard from Sandra B., who told me that she is halfway through the book and finds it to be an excellent peek into the detective's world. So fascinating. So go buy it and read with me. And I want to wish you a happy New Year's 2026. May the new year be filled with peace, love, and prosperity. Now, 2026 is going to be amazing. I will be on Creators Row at CrimeCon 2026 in Las Vegas, May 29th to May 31st. And if you plan to buy your CrimeCon badge, let me save you 10%. Just use my code, all lowercase letters, one word, Murder Shelf, and start getting your merch now. The link is on my blog. Now, if you enjoy the podcast, share it with your friends and family. You can always join my Patreon for $2 to $4 a month and help me pick the next book I feature. And I'm teaching my serial killer class. And we are now on to case studies. Our next Zoom is January 8th, 2026 at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I see you as you hear me. Only on Zoom, you get to see me too. All right, if you didn't listen to episode 147, part 1 on Chasing Down the Zombie Hunter, yeah, I would do that first. In part 1, we left Phoenix Police Sergeant Troy A. Hillman, who has put together an elite cold case team of detectives with varying strengths and superpowers, who are re-examining thousands of pages from the original investigative files stemming from the 1992 murder of Angela Brosso and the 1993 murder of Melanie Bernas. Young women who were just beginning to glimpse the lives they were meant to live, only to have it cut short by a serial killer who brutally attacked while they were riding their bikes along the Phoenix canals. Their senseless murders have instilled fear in the city with no relief due to no arrest. Can they find that one clue who's going to expose this elusive serial killer? With 1,000 names to investigate, the team has come across multiple creepy maggots who look good for the murder, but their DNA does not match. Now in 2010, William Skira went to update Troy on a new development. He had gotten a strange call from a woman, and he and Marianne Ramirez had met with her. A guy named Chuck Smith had been cyberstalking this woman for the past few years. They had originally met on a dating site. He seemed nice at first, but he turned out to be really weird. And he claims that she isn't who she says she is. She is really his ex-girlfriend, Angie. Now, Chuck claims that Angie took their baby girl away from him. Who knows what's true, but this woman is not his ex-girlfriend, Angie, and does not have their baby girl. But how did this weird guy relate to the Canal Murders? Well, she told them that only this past month, Chuck Smith had gone into great graphic detail about how he saw Angela Brosso getting attacked and murdered. Now this got Troy's attention. The woman printed out all of her emails and texts with Chuck Smith, and he had put himself at the scene of the murder, giving her tons of details. And William and Marion were reviewing it. A day later, Marion whooshed into the office and told the boss that this guy Chuck was really looking good for it. His details were really disturbing. He said he had walked on the bike path that night and he saw Angela on the ground. And this scary guy in a trench coat with a machete-like knife, he was there. And he gave Chuck the knife and made him stab her, although he didn't want to. And then the guy made Chuck masturbate as well. Troy's eyebrows shot up. Made him masturbate? Made him? Yeah, Marion was just repeating what the guy wrote. And as crazy as it sounded, on the tunnel wall had been drawn a man in a fedora hat, which often goes with the trench coat. And William believed that they had enough to get Chuck's DNA. Listen, he could be a wingnut who had read a lot in the papers over the last 2 decades, or he might be involved. Regardless, Chuck Smith needed to be ruled out. They learned that Chuck had graduated from culinary school. Well, you learn how to use knives there, don't you? And he was religious. His mother was a psychologist who was married to his abusive stepfather. Chuck was into astrology, and he lived in Surprise, a Phoenix suburb. And he definitely checked off several parts of the FBI's profiles, which I got into in detail in last episode. Now, given to what Chuck had confessed, there would be no casual walk up and knock on the door of Smith's suburban 3-bedroom ranch. The SAU, the Special Assignment Unit, which was basically a SWAT team, rolled up on Chuck's home. 3 beefy squads were all very enthusiastic because they all remembered the Canal Murders. And a few minutes later, Troy was told that there was no resistance. Chuck and 2 juveniles were in custody. Arriving at the house, Troy hoped to see Angela and or Melanie's bikes, or maybe their Walkman, but let's face it, that would be too easy. Dusty, dirty, the house was sparsely furnished. Only an old knife and an old Bible were actually of interest. Could this guy be the Canal Killer? Marion and William updated Troy on the situation, that the man was confused and mentally unstable, and he truly believed that this woman was his ex, Angie. He claimed he hadn't killed Angela, but he had been forced to masturbate. Well, they collected his DNA, warning him to stop cyberstalking, and he would be assigned a mental health counselor. And time dragged on. Weeks later, Kelly Merwin called with the disappointing news. DNA had ruled out Chuck Smith. There was no DNA match. While false confessions did occur, it was hard to believe that he had fabricated that many details. Nevertheless, the DNA was definitive, and they needed to keep moving forth. Just keep going. William had an idea. He asked Troy if he was familiar with the Vidocq Society. He was not. William explained that they were a modern-day Sherlock Holmes located in Philadelphia. A U.S. Customs Service guy, a psychiatric forensic sculptor, and a retired prison psychologist had begun having lunches to debate mysteries and crime. Over time, this evolved into focusing on unsolved deaths and disappearances, and Troy's interest was piqued. If the Canal Murders met their criteria, maybe they could give some insight into something they'd missed or suggest a direction to go in. Well, yes, Troy said with enthusiasm. Quote, now they'd need to convince the chain of command. The phenomenal Lieutenant John Knott had been promoted and he had moved on, and their new lieutenant believed in their elite cold case unit, but he was somewhat cautious being new to the role. Well, Troy now asked, how much did this cost? Well, if the Vidocq Society accepted the case, They paid for the flight, hotel, and per diem for 2 detectives. The only real cost was the detectives' time. All they needed was a 1 to 2 page summary of the murders. Now, I have the greatest respect for the Vidocq Society as I live near Philadelphia. I'm familiar with their contributions, and I know several people who are a part of it, so I am a little biased. It is an organization of esteemed professionals who donate their time and expertise in the pursuit of solving very cold cases. Founded in 1990 by 3 true crime lovers, William Fleischer, an FBI special agent and polygraph expert, was also the customs investigator. Richard Walter is a respected forensic psychologist specializing in the mind of the serial killer, and Frank Bender, a forensic artist who sculpts reconstructions of facial features of the victims to aid identification. From the Vidocq Society page, members include experienced investigators from federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies in the private sector, internationally renowned forensic experts in the fields of pathology, criminology, dactology, forensic dentistry, psychology, polygraphy, and anthropological facial reconstruction, and many former federal, state, and local career prosecutors. Membership is capped at 82, and they have lunch once a month to discuss a case. So Troy recognized that his team's morale was slipping, and he believed that hearing from Vidocq could boost their spirits after so many dead ends. He spoke with his boss, who asked him to vet Vidocq with the FBI, and their response was very positive, highlighting their good success rate and commitment to confidentiality. Troy suggested that Marion and William attend as co-agents, but he also wanted to go, offering to cover his own expense. A few weeks later, William entered Troy's office, grinning ear to ear. They would be going to Philadelphia in October. Marion and William now worked intensely on their Canal Murders PowerPoint presentation before arriving in Philadelphia, feeling prepared and hoping they had the information that Vidocq members needed. However, halfway through the presentation, founding father Richard Walter shouted, quote, "Can you please just show us the pictures?" End quote. Troy recognized him as a seasoned expert who had interviewed over 20,000 inmates and 2,500 sexual predators in Michigan, dissecting their psyches to understand their fantasies and thought processes. Richard Walter hunted predators with his mind. Well, thrown off balance, they were unsure what this thin, aggressive man wanted, and they quickly forwarded to photos of the crime scene. Feeling the sweat rolling down his back, Troy was a wreck as Richard interrupted again, quote, "Just get to the victims already. I want to see the damn injuries," end quote. Decidedly uncomfortable, Troy got to the victims as a hand popped up and questions came. A religion and cult expert thought that this might be related to devil worship, with Richard rolling his eyes. Another asked about blood spatter, and before you knew it, the hour was over, and Troy was in disbelief. That was it? And Marianne and William were equally confused and astounded. But now the experts approached, speaking with all three directly and providing, quote, "a shit ton of input," end quote. Marianne and William now headed back to Phoenix, and Troy was flying out in the morning. He didn't know what to think. He'd never experienced anything like this in his life. Then Richard Walter and some Vidocq experts invited Troy to go out for drinks. Richard, who had an English accent, told him, quote, "Dear boy, I am impressed," end quote. He was? Troy wasn't sure that they had provided all the information that they had wanted to hear. Quote, No, that was besides the point. Never before had the mighty Phoenix Police Department come here and sought our opinions," end quote. In the past, they had seen cases that they believed they could help on, but sources insisted that Phoenix would never allow a group of outsiders to meddle in their case. Well, okay. This was illuminating for Troy, as Richard now criticized the Phoenix Police Department for being far behind in rooting out this serial killer. Richard now drew a chart explaining various points along a continuum of serial killer fantasy. It involved fetishism, dominance and submission, pickerism, well, that is piercing the skin with sharp objects for sexual pleasure, and sadism. Deeper into the continuum, one would find cannibalism, necrophilia, and Richard Walter believed the Canal Killer, he was a cannibal. Quote, "These killers fully disassemble their victims, dissolve them, bury them." End quote. Richard Walters and Robert Capel, who had interviewed Ted Bundy, had developed a classification model for understanding sexual murder. So think the hedonist lust killer. And there are 4 subtypes. All right, first, the power assertive, PA, and power reassurance, PR. In both cases, power was the driving motive, and the rape is planned while the murder is not. PAs are more assertive and more aggressive, seeking to control the victim. PR, power reassurance, they focus on acting out of fantasy, seeking reassurance from the victim. Anger retaliatory, AR, and anger excitation, AE, are both driven by anger, with both the rape and the murder planned. AR, he seeks revenge for his anger at another person by attacking a symbolic victim. So think of Ed Kemper killing his mother over and over and over again until he finally did kill her. And the AE, anger excitation, he prolongs torture, exploitation, mutilation, which energizes his fantasy life. Which did Troy believe the Canal Killer was? And Troy responded, AE, anger excitation. Correct, said Richard Walter. Quote, AEs are the rarest, and your boy shares the company of Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer. Now, good luck. 95% of these guys were contacted by detectives during the initial investigation or inserted themselves into it somehow over the years. The numbers don't lie, my boy. I say again, he's in your files. End quote. Pathology trumps intellect. I love that Richard Walter phrase, and I am stealing it from this point on. Pathology trumps intellect. Richard explained, quote, why does your boy seem to de-escalate from such a brutal murder with Angela to less mutilation on your second? Regardless of your killer's intellectual abilities or intentions, he lost control, and his pathology and need trumped his intellect. It was all about his fantasy, too. Clear as mud, my dear boy. End quote. This killer likes to demonstrate his sense of power, thinking that he is smarter than everybody else. It is a game, and he will be sarcastic and schmarmy. That is a technical term. Later, Richard would call Troy in Phoenix, opening up the possibility that this killer might have international connections. Back in the 1990s, Richard was traveling all over Europe and teaching for Interpol. A Dutch official told him about a case of a lovely South African woman who went backpacking near Amsterdam. She was found beheaded and displayed by a rural tunnel, and her hands went missing. A German detective shared a similar story. A sex worker was found near a country road near Dusseldorf with her head and hands cut off. Additionally, her intestines had been removed and thrown about the scene. Neither of these crimes had been solved. Both of these detectives then received a phone call from a U.S. Air Force, air quotes, general, wanting to know the status of the case. Now Richard asked, is there an Air Force base near Phoenix? Well, indeed, Luke Air Force Base was nearby, similar to both the Dutch and German cases. He reminded Troy that an AE would use sarcastic ruses. He was smarter than everybody else, especially the police. Quote, they would do things like show up at the victim's funeral, pretending to be a long-lost family member, thinking, here I am, only you're too stupid to catch me. End quote. The Dutch case occurred in 1994. It was a young woman named Thompson who was killed the year after Melanie's murder. She had been found partially on a bike walking path. Dittmer, the German victim, was killed in 1996. In addition to her head and hands, her heart had also been removed and placed between her legs. Richard said that he had learned that a serial killer was tied to one case, which was now closed, but Richard Walter was adamant that this was not his victim. Why had he put her heart between her legs? Well, she was a prostitute, thus, with a dirty vagina, pairing the heart with it, a sarcastic ruse. Continuing to dig, Troy came across an older case mentioned in a 1994 entry that caught his full attention. 20 years ago, a man had disemboweled 2 women and masturbated into the guts. Dwayne Samples was his name, and he had recently been released from an Oregon prison. The crime had been committed with the precision of a surgeon, and obviously, the elements of these crimes were similar to the Canal Murders. Contacting Samples' probation officer, he indicated that he was at work on November 9, 1992. Troy learned that Samples was a psych major at Stanford, an amateur boxer, and served in Vietnam, military training popping up again. In 1975, Samples was working in Oregon as a drug counselor and befriended 2 women, Riley Fran Steffen and Diane Ross. Going to visit them, Samples savagely attacked them with a 10-inch knife. Fran Steffen died, with Diane Ross severely injured. Samples was sentenced to life in prison. However, his Vietnam-induced PTSD was used as a mitigating factor, with Governor Vic Adderley reducing his sentence to 20 years. Samples had actually served 15. The prosecutor and community members had fought this, but Samples had been released. 15 years for disemboweling and murdering someone seems light to me. Well, now Troy called the prosecutor, learning that Samples' house had held some bizarre, violent art. A horseman holding a stick with a human head attached, and others with satanic themes. His diary contained, quote, numerous fantasies of eviscerating women and evidence that he had stalked one of his victims. Samples had some bizarre infatuation with women killing him like a Christian martyr, end quote. Whoa, wow, did this guy look good for it? Did they have a DNA sample for Samples? Troy wondered, his adrenaline kicking in. But this time Kelly's call came in quickly. Samples was already in the national DNA system, and he would have matched when they uploaded the Canal Killer's DNA. It wasn't him. He was ruled out. Keep going. Driven by Vidocq's belief that the killer was in their files, Dominic Rostenkowski and J.J. Alberta uncovered another lead. On November 1st, 1994, Phoenix police officer Spittler spotted a van in a secluded area during the canal stakeout on 2 consecutive nights. Now, this raised the possibility that someone, targeting women on bikes, was stalking the area. At that time, Thomas Warswick, who was only wearing shorts, had attempted to sexually assault a blonde near Angela's apartment shortly before her murder. The assault had been interrupted by a good Samaritan, and Dom planned to use his magical abilities to get Warswick to confess. That night, Dom called Troy at home. This was the guy. He knew it. Well, had he confessed? Dom said no, he denied it. But Dom could see the black in his eyes. His very soul was black, too. Troy warned him, hey man, don't get too excited. We've been here before. And Dom replied, quote, don't worry, this time the Dominators got it. Book me a spot on Dateline, end quote. While they continued going through the files during their investigation, working from A to L and then Z to M, a tip came in about a man with wild, crazy eyes. His name was Scott Waitman, a highway maintenance worker involved in irrigation and landscaping. He had served in the military and had several tattoos, including a skull and a dragon. His background was marked by violence and property crimes. An ex-wife, often a valued source of information for the police, described Waitman's explosive anger issues. Additionally, there was a 1993 assault report against him. While he was brutalizing this woman, he said, quote, "Stop your fucking crying. No one will hear you. And if the police come, you'll be dead before they get through the front door. I've got a gun. And when you married me, it was till death do us part." He grabbed a buck knife and held it to her throat, end quote. Waitman's mother also lived 5 minutes away from where Angela and Melanie were killed. Waitman himself, he was murdered in 1997 when he was 37 years old, and this would explain why there were no more murders after Melanie's. It was like little kids waiting for Santa, the anxiety of waiting to find out about Warswick. Finally, Kelly called. Warswick was out, and Troy had to let Dom down easily. It was a crushing blow. He had thought this was it. Quote, "Dom looked like I punched him square in the stomach and knocked every ounce of oxygen out of him. No jokes, no words. He just sat there," end quote. Troy gave Dom the rest of the day off, reminding him that he was a damn good detective. Checking in with JJ, who made arrest after arrest and was constantly slammed with upcoming trials, JJ requested a clone, and he told Troy that he had run into Kelly at a lab meeting and Crazy Eyes Waitman was out too. Keep going. News alert! The 25-year investigation into the grim sleeper murders of Black women in Los Angeles ended when Lonnie David Franklin Jr. was arrested on July 7, 2010. Charged with murder and attempted murder, Lonnie Franklin Jr. was convicted on May 5, 2016, and sentenced to death that August. But Franklin died of natural causes at age 67 while on death row at San Quentin Prison on March 28, 2020. But significantly, Franklin was caught using a new technique that involved familial DNA, which the Los Angeles police chief stated could change policing in America. How did they catch Lonnie Davis Jr.? The LAPD had the Grim Sleeper's DNA, but it hadn't yielded any matches in the CODIS database despite extensive efforts. Frustrated, they turned to a new technique called familial DNA searching, approved in California in 2008 to combat violent crime. When they entered the Grim Sleeper's DNA into the FBI database, they found a partial match with a son, leading them to Lonnie David Franklin Jr. This technique raised privacy and civil liberties concern, and it was only allowed in 4 states at this time: California, Colorado, Texas, and Virginia. By 2025, there are several more states that allow it, including New York and Florida, while Maryland and Washington, D.C. ban familial DNA searching, a decision that I find unreasonable. It is not used frivolously, but on brutal rape and murder cases, often serial murder. Why not use the tools you have to get the bad guys off the street? I understand the constitutional issues involved, but protecting the people of the United States is the primary duty outlined in the Constitution. As of 2023, this technology has helped solve 651 criminal cases and identified 318 perpetrators. Law enforcement uses genealogy websites like GEDmatch Pro and Family Tree DNA. But clients like myself, we must opt in to allow our DNA to be searched. As Paul Hulse explained to me, law enforcement does not actually access your DNA directly. They compare using a digital representation of your unique DNA profile. I opted in years ago because I want to help remove dangerous individuals from the streets, thus making all of us safer and bringing justice to the survivors, families, and loved ones. Well, Troy excitedly called Kelly to ask her about the new DNA analysis related to the Grim Sleeper case, and she knew all about it. And Arizona's lab was expected to open in the spring, but it had stalled due to funding being diverted to the Rapid DNA project, which aimed to speed up analysis from weeks to hours. While this is impressive, it didn't help with the Canal Murders, and Troy tried to persuade his superior to consider the familial DNA technique. The lieutenant supported him and communicated with the commander and then the chief, but they lacked the budget necessary for a PhD-level scientist to oversee the lab. Consequently, they continued reviewing files, updating tips, collecting DNA covertly, and facing rejection. Troy stared at his dry erase and caulkboard, rereading Pathology Trumps Intellect and sarcastic ruses that Richard Walter had spawned. Troy now understood these concepts fully, observing every day how sports figures, celebrities, and politicians often lost everything due to reckless, stupid behavior. Intelligence would have advised against them taking these actions, but pathology won out. Richard Walter was pleased to see Troy's newfound insight. Quote, "Dear boy, you are right. Yes. It's the reason serial killers eventually get caught. They may be quite good at their craft, but they eventually screw up. Their pathology kicks in, they lose control, and then they leave something important behind or get caught where they shouldn't be. Bundy, Dahmer, BTK, they all did it." End quote. Richard asked Troy about this case's sarcastic ruses. Troy told him about the piece of plywood in the alley with, quote, "I cut that bitch's head off," end quote, written in lipstick, and the tunnel graffiti with Tweety from Melanie's murder. Richard said he was correct. At this point, I am thinking that the killer is an artist. He draws, he sketches, probably cartoons, as depicted in the tunnel graffiti. And he hung his calling card on the tunnel, doing this after Melanie's murder. Richard told Troy that he was spot on. Quote, "They think the cops are stupid. They like to mock you guys. I wouldn't doubt if your killer showed up at the press conference after the murder. They do it quite often." End quote. I'm paraphrasing now. Now, attending a press conference is risky, but they get to relive the murders. They get a rush from it. And then Richard said, "Remember, the murder isn't over until the killer is done." AE types keep souvenirs, pictures, video, pieces of clothing, jewelry, heads, to relive the murders in their minds, fantasizing while masturbating. As Troy pondered these grisly murders, he became a dad to the most perfect creature to ever exist. Diapers, feedings, and sleepless nights brought joy and exhaustion. Amidst it all, his obsession to catch the murderer grew. Would his child be out of high school before they caught him? Then, out of the blue, a woman called suspecting her newly deceased father, Wilbur Schultz, was the Canal killer. In his last days, he mentioned doing bad things to women in Phoenix, and when the woman inquired about the Canal deaths, he threatened her, and JJ and Dom would investigate. Schultz had a record of DUIs, bar fights, and domestic violence, but no sexual violence, and he had served in the Marine Corps. Kelly planned to use the daughter's DNA to rule him in or out, and weeks later, Kelly confirmed the results. There was no match. Keep going. The team was now overwhelmed with 2,750 cold cases in Phoenix. To address this, Dom and JJ organized a Vidocq training symposium with attendees coming from California, Nevada, Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. Richard Walter was set to teach cold case investigators about the supremacy of pathology over intellect and his presentation was unique. Brilliant, polished, and raw, he punctuated with harsh ridicule. Richard showed the assembled a graphic video of a homosexual serial killer vanquishing his roommate, culminating with him consuming body parts cooked in his frying pan, which was recovered by the authorities. Authentic, it was the real deal, and thankfully this happened prior to lunch. The afternoon session focused on autoeroticism and extreme deviancy, where some cases that seemed like suicides were actually accidental deaths. Breakout sessions were led by other Vidocq members as detectives discussed cases and received immediate feedback. Investigators received training on tracking serial predators and understanding their perspectives on crime. And on the final night, over drinks, Richard reassured a frustrated Troy that he is in your files. To which Troy replied, "Yeah, but we need a break." Marianne then received an unusual call from a forensic genealogist, Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick, who had founded a company called Identifiers. She would be attending a DNA conference, and she believed that she could help solve cold cases. Well, Troy spoke with Dr. Fitzpatrick, learning that she specialized in identifying surnames through DNA. She had worked with the military, historical societies, and law enforcement. Although he felt excited about the potential, he remained skeptical. He then called Kelly, who really enjoyed reading research journals, and I thought, boy, we'd really get along. Did Kelly know anything about this? And she did not, but DNA research was rapidly advancing through ancestry sites like 23andMe. Kelly and her lab were actually attending that particular DNA conference to meet Dr. Fitzpatrick, who had a notable history of helping identify children from the Titanic and soldiers lost in battle. Her work had given many grieving families their loved ones back. Learning more, Kelly called Troy. Forensic genealogy was legit, and she recommended using it for the Canal Murders. She introduced Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick, a professional in her 50s with short, loosely permed hair, who translated complex DNA analysis for the team in just 45 minutes. Quote, she could take the numbers from a DNA profile on a male and predict ancestry, including geographical origination of male paternal relatives, and even give investigators a surname, end quote. This is all brand new, and it must have sounded like magic or voodoo at the time. While the team was all in on giving this a try, they now had to convince the upper echelon to cut a check for $750. To date, police work and new fancy magical tactics were oil and water. Speaking to his lieutenant, Troy explained that Dr. Fitzpatrick used the male Y DNA marker, which was identical in male descendants, while she isolated the DNA sequencing. Quote, she's a doctor of witchcraft and weird science, end quote, was the response. Well, Troy elaborated on how groundbreaking this was, and $750 was really a crumb in their police budget. Quote, Richard from Vidocq states emphatically that he is in our files. The problem is there's just too many names in our files. They're all creepy maggots, and we don't have the resources to flush them all out, end quote. Well, Troy got permission to vet Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick's work, and all the responses were glowing. And it would take several more months to get the brass's consent, but they did get that $750 check. The breakthrough. Dr. Fitzpatrick called Troy. The surname she came up with was Miller. The family originated in England and came to America, settling in North Carolina. Troy was elated. Miller was a very common name, but he went back to the files to see where the Millers appeared. Team member Mark Armistead reported that there were 5 Millers in their database. Brian Miller in file 155, James Miller in 430, Brian Miller in 668, and Karen Miller, a psychic who didn't have a file. There was a Bill Miller who lived in Angela's apartment complex who was on the roster given to them by the management company. This was the test of the 90 to 95% chance that he's in your files theory. All right, Brian with an I Miller. A tip had come in on November 10th, 1992 by an anonymous female caller. She had met him through a newspaper ad. Violent, he was following her around. Deemed workable, detectives had interviewed him with him denying having anything to do with Angela. Arrested for a felony in 2009, this Brian with an I Miller's DNA was already in CODIS, and it would have hit if it had matched their killer. Ruled out, keep going. March 23, 1994. James Miller, Yolanda Hines, and William Rivera were in a van by the canal around midnight. Saying that they had broken down, they had pushed the van over by the canal. These 3 had been seen on the interstate with the female begging for money. All signs indicated that they were passing through the area. James Miller had scant criminal background, so there wasn't very much interesting here. If nothing else panned out, Troy decided he would get his DNA then. Keep going. On November 15, 1992, Karen Miller called in saying she was into numerology, going on about the number 8 and the zodiac. She felt that the boyfriend had stalked Angela and the suspect smoked Camel cigarettes. Okay, keep going. The Bill Miller who lived in Angela's apartment complex had a clean background, no criminal involvement. If all of the other 999 names of the files were excluded, they would circle back and get his DNA, but there just wasn't anything of interest here. And then Brian with a Y Miller, file number 668. File 668 was half an inch thick, which grabbed Troy's attention. A typed memorandum dated May 31st, 1994. 21-year-old Brian Miller, born in Hawaii. He was 6 feet tall, skinny, and wore glasses. An anonymous caller mentioned seeing Brian with a female bodysuit in the days before the murder, as did his roommate, Randall McClade. Brian worked at St. Vincent de Paul and often brought women's clothing home. The caller believed that he had never had a girlfriend and had a troubled relationship with his family. As a teen, he was involved in a knife attack and spent some time in juvenile detention, possibly in the Phoenix area. Troy now shut his door, laser-focused on Brian Miller with a Y. Brian Patrick Miller had been arrested as a juvenile for arson in 1984, shoplifting in 1985, curfew violation in 1987, and aggravated assault in June 1989. Arson, huh? Arson can be related to the progression of the serial killer. But this guy was young and with no military background, so where could he have learned to kill so precisely? And they had looked into Randall McClade, with nothing particular coming back on him. Digging more, Brian broke curfew and rode off on his bike when the police spotted him. He had abandoned the bike and run, but was caught. In 1992, he reported that his men's mountain bike had been stolen off the front porch. So he liked mountain bikes. Interesting. Earlier that year, he was a witness in a burglary while working as a missionary for the church where the incident occurred. He had been arrested for shoplifting after taking a music cassette and putting it into his Walkman and attempting to leave the store. He admitted to the officers that he had done this, although he claimed he intended to bring it back. And additionally, in 1985, he had tried to steal a small motorized Speed Rider toy from a grocery store. Well, while these actions were reckless and stupid, he wasn't exactly a serial killer. So what about that stabbing? So on May 17th, 1989, Brian Miller was arrested after he boarded a bus headed to Paradise Valley Mall and stabbed a woman named Celeste Bentley in the back as she walked through the parking lot. The attack was unprovoked. Fleeing the scene, he was apprehended later. This incident was strikingly similar to the stabbings of Angela and Melanie. At this time, during an interview, an officer asked Brian if the stabbing had sexually excited him. He denied this, but admitted to having sexual behavior problems, and he was seeing a doctor for them. When asked about his feelings at the time of the stabbing, he said, quote, "It sent chills up my spine," end quote, and the victim had resembled his mother. Hard stop. That is known as a clue. Chills up his spine, and she resembled his mother. Big time mommy issues here. Brian said he had thrown the knife away, but he drew a copy of it, and it looked like a professional artist had drawn it. Now, Richard had also said these A&E guys, they can be artsy, drawing, photography, painting, and I said I thought he was a cartoonist. So, Glendale Police Report, dated March 1st, 1984. On this date, 11-year-old Brian Miller was involved in a fire that started in a wastepaper basket next to his teacher's desk, damaging the classroom. Brian claimed he was in the restroom when he smelled smoke and went to another room to work on his art project. He later admitted to starting the fire because of his bad grades. He said, quote, "When I got to school, I felt like setting a fire," end quote. Okay, so we've got a troubled teen in therapy for sexual behavior, loves mountain bikes, a petty thief who steals heavy metal tapes, tried to burn the school down because he felt like it, and stabbed a woman who looked like his mom for no reason whatsoever, and it sent chills up his spine. And in the files, was this the creepy maggot? More from file 668. October 24th, 1990. Brian's mother, Ellen Miller, listed as a detention officer for the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, came in. Brian was now 18 years old, and he was due to be released by the Department of Corrections for the aggravated assault of Celeste Bentley. Ellen Miller gave the police a document describing how Brian intended to kidnap a girl named Emma Berthier, age 17. But the officers could not find anyone named Emma Berthier. The Department of Corrections then contacted the Young Aces, a halfway house where Brian was due to stay since his mother refused to have him home given his violent behavior. Now, this alleged kidnap letter was frightening. The details, the organized planning and evidence, it included a razor for shaving her legs. All right? His equipment included masking tape, a long-bladed knife, a carving fork, and a bucket for blood, large garbage bags to hold body parts, and many other terrifying items. Worse was his plan for this Emma. Videotaping so he could rewatch. Tie her up, cut off her clothes, rape her, bite one of her nipples off, take photos, pull out pans, knives, fork, bag, grill, and seasonings. He'd kill her and eat her parts. Cannibalism. He would preserve her head so he could look at her whenever he wants. Now, this is only some of it. You're going to have to read Troy Hillman's book for all of the details. But holy moly, talk about your blood running cold. This was a tough read. The officer took this report, noting that it appeared to be a fantasy. Troy reached out to the therapist who had treated Brian while he was incarcerated, and Brian was seen as dangerous. He had tried to get Brian into a treatment facility after his release, but to no avail. Well, this document, the therapist confronted Brian about it, and he said it was a fantasy, and he pulled the name out of a magazine. Believing Brian, the therapist now concluded that he was not dangerous. After he had stabbed a woman in the back because he felt like it. Okay, I disagree. Then again, I have hindsight, right? So now Troy is thinking that this guy looks really, really good. But how many times before had they been there? Well, the team quickly researched Brian Miller, finding that he is a self-proclaimed zombie hunter. He bought a Crown Victoria at a police auction and converted it into his beloved zombie hunting car, complete with green and yellow roof lights. This shows he is one dedicated zombie hunter. After being pulled over, police confirmed that the car resembled a real police vehicle. He even had a zombie mannequin in the back seat. Miller lived in Central Phoenix, and he worked for Amazon in West Phoenix, and he had grown up in the area. Although he had lived in Washington State from 1997 to 2002, he was definitely in Phoenix at the time of the murders. On Facebook, his profile pictured him in a quasi-stormtrooper mask, along with images of him in a trench coat and holding a large steampunk-style gun. He called himself Huadin Lucos, which is Welsh for lucky duck. Was this lucky duck connected to the drawings found in the tunnel? He posted about Saint Maria Goretti, a Catholic girl from Italy who was attacked by a neighbor. She rejected him, saying that she would rather die, and was stabbed 14 times. On her deathbed, she forgave her assailant. Now, locked up in prison, the attacker dreams of her and repents. Maria was canonized the patron saint of youth, young women, and rape victims. Now, if you remember, a cross had been carved into the victim, and we all wondered if this was some kind of religious symbolism. And now we find he's talking about Saint Maria. Well, was all of this connected? Troy then discovered a Welsh legend about Saint Winifred, who, after rejecting young Prince Caradoc, was pursued and decapitated by him. Her head had rolled towards the church with her father praying deeply, and she miraculously rose again with only a faint red line around her neck. Did this story have some significance to Brian? Was it a coincidence that the forensic examiner found a similar faint red line circling Melanie's neck? Now, Saint Winifred is often depicted carrying her head, reminiscent of Angela's killer. Yet, this photo of Brian at 18 shows him to be a skinny young man, casting doubt on his ability to overpower two athletic women. The truth would ultimately lie in the DNA, and they planned to get Brian Miller's sample. Dom went down to Chili's Bar and Grill to speak with the manager, who happened to be the daughter of a retired police officer. Told the Phoenix Police Department needed her help with a violent crime investigation, she was eager to help. She sterilized plates, cutlery, and mugs in the kitchen and locked them in her office where only she had the key. When team member Clark Schwarzkopf arrived, the sanitized place settings were ready for use. Clark, using a false identity, was surprised when Brian Miller arrived at Chili's with his 15-year-old daughter. Clark was posing as someone seeking to hire more security after his warehouse was experiencing thefts, and Brian had showed interest in the job and filled out an application while he talked about his passion for steampunk, a blend of futurism with 19th century technology. They ordered and they ate, knowing that his DNA was all over the sterilized plates and utensils. He didn't drink until the very last, causing sweat to run down Clark's back. Finished, Brian and his daughter exited, and at that moment, JJ and Dom, wearing gloves, quickly collected the items that Brian had used, including the straw. Once Clark received a text that Brian had left, he met up with a very anxious JJ and Dom. They hoped that they had obtained a solid DNA sample, and Kelly promised to process it swiftly. Keep going. But time passed slowly. Then one day, the conference room door flew open, and there stood Kelly. Well, that was odd. The scientists never came over to the headquarters. And she said, quote, We wanted you to know in person that you did it. Brian Miller's DNA matches. Congratulations. And the silence in the room was deafening, end quote. Troy would compare it to a bunch of weary soldiers learning the war was over. Wait, Kelly said that it matched? Wait, it matched? A cheer went up, followed by embraces and raw human emotion flooding the room. Quote, it was genuine happiness for these two beautiful, savagely murdered women who had been cheated of their lives, and for their loved ones finally getting justice they so well deserved. After 3.5 painstaking years of disappointment, stacked upon disappointment, we had finally located the missing puzzle piece of the investigation. I was lightheaded and shell-shocked, end quote. I actually cheered out loud reading this. This was great. Now they needed to get this piece of shit into custody, search his zombie hunting car, and get to his house ASAP. Informing the superiors began with everyone sworn to absolute secrecy lest the word get out. They needed to contain this guy, and the war was not over as the apprehension phase began. They planned to detain Brian Miller at work to secure his vehicle and obtain search warrants. Following that, the homicide unit would take over the case. So proud, Troy commended his team for hanging in there, for not giving up, for not believing that this guy was dead. Troy managed to call his wife Karen, sharing the great news. Quote, wow, that's unbelievable, babe. Yay, you guys did it. I knew you would. Congratulations. End quote. Talk about walking on cloud 9. And Karen was sworn to secrecy too. Many things could still go wrong. Miller might flee or destroy key evidence before they could reach him. And Troy was preparing to meet with Bob Schutz, the prosecutor at the Maricopa County Attorney's Office, who was dreaded by defense attorneys. Troy had frequently checked in with Schutz about the Canal Killer case over the last 42 months. Around 6:30 p.m., William informed Troy that Brian Miller was in custody without incident. They had the zombie hunter's car, and they had already accessed his locker at work with nothing of evidentiary value found. JJ now checked in from the Miller residence, noting that it was a hoarder's paradise, stacked to the ceiling and smelling horrible. He couldn't believe Miller lived there with his teenage daughter. Troy now enlisted a seasoned sergeant to lead the house search and evidence collection. The sergeant quickly formed a team of detectives, including JJ, Dom, and Clark. Meanwhile, Mark, William, and Marianne were in the war room, preparing for the anticipated tips that would flood in. Brian Miller sat calmly, showing none of the nervous signs that detectives look for during interrogations. After 20 years of hiding in plain sight, he was now caught and possibly facing the death penalty. Yet, he was calm. Troy saw an ordinary man, not a military badass, who killed for the twisted pleasure it brought him. Would he talk about his conquests or keep silent? As Troy watched the TV monitor, he reflected on the questions that had haunted him for 4 years. Why did Brian write WSC in dark red paint and on a wall? Why leave the lipstick message in the alley? Why take Angela's head and redress Melanie? Why cut off their clothes but leave their shoes and socks? Would he finally get answers? Richard Walter warned the team that Miller would likely obfuscate, hiding his true intentions and meaning, viewing the interrogation as a game. But Troy trusted Williams's skills. He had a knack for making people comfortable and extracting information. Troy writes that it would be a vicious chess match. William sat calmly as Brian Miller freely shared his history. When asked about bikes, Brian perked up, discussing his BMX, choppers, beach cruisers, and his frequent rides on his Mongoose mountain bike. Asked about religion, Brian mentioned that his mother, Ellen, was Mormon, but he attended a non-denominational church. His grandparents were Mennonite, and he had briefly attended a Mennonite church in the early 1990s. Then Brian zigged and began discussing his mother beating him regularly with a belt, starting after his father died when he was 5. No one had believed him because his mother worked in law enforcement. William asked about Brian's criminal background. Well, he admitted to shoplifting and criminal damage and an assault at the Paradise Valley Mall. He had stabbed a woman, quote, but claimed he kind of blacked out during it, end quote. The woman had resembled his mother. He insisted that those actions didn't define him, painting himself as a victim of his mother. William also shared a copy of the letter his mother had submitted to the police, detailing a supposed plan to kidnap and murder. And Brian noted that while the handwriting looked like his, it wasn't familiar to him. Brian told William he liked to ride his bike at Metro Center and Sunny Slope. He avoided canals, tunnels, and bike paths. When asked about sex and masturbation, Brian initially denied it, but later acknowledged doing it a few times in public. He admitted to having sex with a prostitute at 18, but he couldn't recall masturbating by canals or having sex on a bike path, though he wished he had met girls there. Quote, he just dropped another sarcastic ruse. He did meet girls out there. They just didn't want to meet him, end quote. Brian insisted he hadn't sexually assaulted anyone, claiming he only stabbed one woman at the mall, and he never dressed in women's clothing. William pressed Brian for details about the murders, with Brian denying knowing Melanie or Angela. But that wasn't what William asked, is it? When asked about his DNA at the scene, Brian insisted it was impossible. Quote, I can't remember everything from back then. I didn't kill anyone, end quote, as he deflected again by mentioning hiring prostitutes. William brought the focus back to the murders. Brian argued it couldn't be him, since everyone he had sex with on the bike paths was still alive. Didn't he just say he didn't go near bike paths? Well, with this admission, William left the room to let Brian stew in his thoughts, with him hollering to the ceiling, why is this happening to me? Resuming the interrogation, William asked Brian about weapons, and Brian admitted he didn't carry any. When questioned about using the knife in the Paradise Mall parking lot, he changed his tune, saying he carried it for protection because he felt scared at school. When asked about Saint Winifred, the patron saint of virgins, he replied, quote, I wasn't in church for her, end quote, which is a really unusual answer. So, was Brian a lucky duck? He had quacked like a duck in elementary school. Really? His interests included steampunk, comic cons, and zombies. During a zombie walk, he wore a gas mask and trench coat, carrying a Nerf gun, which later inspired his zombie hunter car idea. Now William began discussing the violence he had inflicted on his ex-wife. He referred to it as light bondage and considered it normal, though he admitted to holding a knife to her throat, but insisted it was all in fun. Fun? Brian made a comment about doing some bloodletting, and William jumped at the opportunity, prompting Brian to ask for a lawyer. Leaving Brian alone, he felt a surge of anger. Where did they get his DNA? Why was the world treating him like this? It was all nonsense. Didn't his wife want him to punish her? He hadn't killed anyone. He hated the sight of blood. Another sarcastic ruse. And the team and I believe that the sight of blood turned Brian on. William was frustrated with this interrogation. He had expected more from it. But Troy admired his ability to confront a serial killer. It was far from the typical interview. He reminded William about A&Es, the anger excitation, known for their high IQ and difficulty in interviews. They often played coy, trying to turn the tables and see what the police knew. Meanwhile, Miller was safely locked up in jail, going nowhere. And that is where I will conclude part 2 of Troy Hillman's book, Chasing Down the Zombie Hunter. I encourage you to buy the book and read along with me because I just can't tell you everything. We're going to meet Brian's ex-wife, girlfriends, as justice comes for Angela and Melanie. The conclusion, episode 149, Still Room in Hell, is coming. Thank you for listening. 2026 is going to be amazing. I will also be at the Hamptons Whodunit event in April for a weekend of true crime, fun, and discussions with crime fiction authors. Joining us will be Cheryl McCollum, the talented CSI, founder of the Cold Case Investigative Research Foundation and Wildlife CSI, the host of Zone 7 with Cheryl McCollum, as well as Joseph Scott Morgan from Body Bags and many others. It promises to be an incredible weekend. Don't forget about CrimeCon 2026 in Las Vegas. And remember to use my code MurderShelf and save 10% on your badge and get your merch. If you enjoy the podcast, please share it with friends and family and leave a positive 5-star review. All of my sources, articles, and a ton of photographs are linked on my blog at www.murdershelfbookclub.com, December 2025. If you have any questions or comments, contact me at jill@murdershelfbookclub.com or follow me on X, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. I cannot wait for part 3 on chasing down the zombie hunter, plus my interview with our author, Troy A. Hillman. There are special episodes and interviews with some astounding people involved in true crime coming as well. See you next time, Murder Bookies. Written and produced by Jill, all rights reserved. Music, The Pewter Elephant by Blue Dot Sessions.